And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I'm your host, Demo, and it's time for another Commander Quick Brew, talking about some Forgotten Realms legendary creatures and what are you going to do with them. So first off, I got Shessra, Death's Whisper. That's a bit of a tough one to say. 2 black-green, human elf, warlock, 1/3. And again, just like I said about Krydell, they're doing this human elf thing, which I think means half-elf. You know, in D&D, you have half-elves, which means essentially, you know, my mom was a human, my dad was an elf, or some combination thereof. So you're half human, half elf. And rather than create the half-elf creature type, because I think they didn't want to overwhelm the set with too many new creature types, they just went with human and elf. She has the ability Bewitching Whispers. When Shessra, Death's Whisper, enters the battlefield, target creature blocks this turn if able. That is a really neat and interesting ability. First thing I thought of with it was Death Touch. I thought it was great for a Death Touch commander. And then when you look at the second ability, it makes even more sense. Whispers of the Grave. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So definitely a Death Touch commander for sure. You can put a bunch of Death Touch creatures in here, you swing with them, your commander is going to tell some creature that it has to block, so you're going to get to have that dies trigger very frequently. So obviously that in itself is easy to build around. I did my Kiku Knight's Flowered Underwhelming Commander deck recently, and again, that I'm just like, okay, I have a commander that's going to be killing creatures, so put a lot of those dies trigger stuff in there. Lots of stuff that wants creatures to be dying. There's tons of support for that in the format, so that stuff is an auto include. I would put lots of Death Touch creatures in here as well, because making your opponent's creatures block works really good with that. This is just, though, at the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 2 life. If you do, draw a card. So you're only drawing 1 extra card maximum. This is not at the end of every single turn or anything like that. It's not a super overwhelming ability, but getting that extra draw on your turn, I think, is going to be really important. You're really going to want to make sure that a creature is dying on your turn every single time. And then you can just throw some other fun stuff in there, you know, creatures that want to be blocked. This is exactly what I did in my Gore Muldrak deck, is I put a bunch of creatures in there that want to be blocked, like Engulfing Slagworm or Elven Warhounds. Unfortunately, that deck was blue. Shesra is not, so you can't put some of the funner ones in there like Tellurian Entrancer. But I'm sure if you did some digging, you could find definitely some interesting creatures that when they become blocked, something happens. But I definitely think the easiest way to go here is your commander enters the battlefield. You force one of your opponent's creatures to block some creature that you probably want off the table. Then you swing with your 1/1 Death Touch Snake from, say, your Ophiomancer, and it dies. You get to remove a creature, and you get to pay 2 life and draw a card at the beginning of your end step. That seems like a pretty good build around to me. Next up, Volo, Guide to Monsters. 2, a green and a blue, human wizard, 3/2. Whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature card in your graveyard, copy that spell. Very interesting. So this deck is encouraging you to play different creature types. You actually don't want to play the same creature types. This is the opposite of a tribal deck. It's not tribal maybe, which I think is super fun and interesting. First things first, though, this card goes in a lot of decks. Just like I said about Oswald, I really think Volo can go in a lot of decks. Basically any blue-green creature deck where you're not playing tribal, this is just going to be super extra value. This goes in my Tishana deck for sure. And yes, I probably do have a few elves in that deck. I probably have a couple of humans in that deck. But anytime you cast a creature spell and it doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a one in your graveyard, you get to copy it. So basically this deck just becomes, I mean, a good stuff creature deck for sure, but you're gonna want to avoid the same creature types, which is what I think makes this interesting. You can't just put a bunch of humans and elves in this deck, or you're just not going to get the value. What you want to do is you want to put as many different creature types in this deck as you can. So if I'm building this deck, first of all, ETBs work really well. You know, if I got my Eternal Witness and I create a token copy of it, I'm going to get that extra ETB. So that always is helpful. The more ETB creatures you can put in, the better. You just want to avoid copying those creatures. And by the way, your Volo Volo is a human wizard. So if your Volo is in play, human and wizard are two very popular creature types. So actually the Eternal Witness thing doesn't work because Eternal Witness is a human. So if your Volo is in play, Eternal Witness, you're going to cast it and you're not going to get the copy because you have a human on the battlefield that you control. So that actually doesn't work. So right out of the gate, you can't put any humans or wizards in this deck, or you won't get the effect off of it. It's just a waste. I mean, I guess you could still put Eternal Witness in this deck. It's still a great card, but you're just not going to get the copy of it. Man, the more I think about it, the more I think this is a very interesting build around. Like, you know, if you're going to go with elves, so elves obviously very popular creature type in these colors, 2 or 3 at most. Like maybe I put a Farhaven elf and a Wood Elves in here and that's it. Put a Sakura Tribe Elder in here because that's a snake. But Sakura Tribe Elder is a shaman, so you got to be careful there as well. Man, what an interesting build around. You really would have to do some serious research with this, which I love. You know, from a deck building aspect, that's really fantastic. I really love the flavor here, first of all, because of Volo and what he's doing. He's trying to find and catalog different creature types, and the build around is really fantastic. You just can't put a bunch of good stuff creatures in here. You might have to avoid a lot of the normal good stuff creatures that you would put in a deck like this. You definitely could go the toolbox sort of creature route, but again, Birthing Pod or something like that doesn't work in this deck, or Vanifar doesn't work in this deck. I mean, it works, but you have to cast the creature spell. So just cheating something into play isn't going to get you the copy. Again, so it's limiting there. Very interesting build around. I might have to actually do a deck tech with this one, because originally I thought, okay, yeah, it's kind of interesting, but the more I think about it, this is very challenging, and it's the kind of deck that I really like to dive into, because I really like the challenge of trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Like, how many elves do you put in the deck? Again, I probably would put 0 humans and wizards, and I would put like maybe 2 or 3 of other creature types max, because you do want to get that value. Very interesting commander, very interesting build around. And finally today, Ebondeath Dracolich, and this is a really interesting one. 2 black, zombie dragon, 5/2, has flash, which is always great on your commander, and flying. So a 5/2 flyer, that's not bad. Ebondeath Dracolich enters the battlefield tapped. Okay, I mean, you know, if you're casting it with flash, having it enter the battlefield tapped isn't so bad. You may cast Ebondeath Dracolich from your graveyard if a creature not named Ebondeath Dracolich died this turn. So obviously the wording there in commander, because you're only going to have one card named Ebondeath Dracolich, is if Ebondeath dies, so someone kills it, you can't immediately just cast it again. Some other creature has to die. So we're already in the sort of dies tribal a little bit, but not really. You know, obviously you're going to want to put lots of creature removal in this deck anyway, but creatures are always dying all over the place in a commander game, so you just have to wait for your moment. And because your commander has flash, this can just sit in your graveyard or in your command zone. Like, obviously you're going to cast it from your command zone the first time, and then if it goes to the graveyard, you just leave it there. And as long as your opponents don't exile it from your graveyard somehow, you can just continually cast this from your graveyard every time a creature dies and cheat commander tax, right? You're never going to have to pay commander tax again unless it gets returned to the command zone somehow. So that's really fantastic all on its own. Is there some shenanigans here? I don't know. You know, is there some combo where I have an Ashnod's Altar and I sacrifice this guy, but then I'd have to sacrifice something else? I mean, there's lots of creatures that when they die, they give you mana. So that's something there as well. I mean, you could sacrifice your Blood Vassal to add 2 black. That'll pay for the black on Ebondeath. And then if you sacrifice it to an Ashnod's Altar, now you've gotten the dies trigger that is required to cast him from the graveyard, and you also have the requisite mana you need. But, you know, then how do you get the Blood Vassal back? You know, there's a whole lot of hoops to jump through there. So I don't know. I'm sure someone will figure out some sort of combo here where you can cast your commander infinitely from the graveyard, get infinite ETBs, and possibly infinite mana. I don't know. For me, this is just, I have a commander that is always going to be casting from the graveyard, which is great. I mean, it's unfortunate that he's mono black, so you can't put stuff in there like Laboratory Drudge or River Kelpie. Those cards would be fantastic in a deck like this. I definitely would put Amulet of Vigor in this deck. I think that's going to be fantastic because now your Ebondeath will come into play untapped, you know, or I guess he'll come into play tapped and then he'll untap himself. And that's going to be really beneficial for you because now it can block. It's like, surprise, I'm going to block with my guy. That's obviously why it comes into play tapped, so that you can't just keep doing that. I mean, it's great just to have a commander in the command zone that you can be sacrificing all the time to certain effects. And then, you know, you don't have to worry about constantly paying that commander tax. You can just get it back. It's definitely a very unique and could be very powerful ability. I think probably you're going to want a dies theme here, a sacrifice theme, where you expect your creatures to be dying all the time. You're always going to have your commander available to you that you can sacrifice. So a sacrifice theme, dies trigger theme, and a graveyard theme, just doing all of that sort of stuff in the same deck, I think is going to work really well here. But that is it for today. Another Commander Quick Brew, and thanks for tuning in.